Hello and welcome to Tales from the Bridge. Mike Carey is on the show today. James, Kevin, and myself sit down with Mike and have a great conversation. So we very much hope you enjoy this one. We sure did. As usual, follow the show, rate the show, send us a review, send us an email. Let us know if there are any books or films we should be reading or watching. We would love to hear from you. All right, thanks again for joining us today. Everyone's waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge.
We're very happy to have Mike Carey with us today. Our listeners may know Mike better as M.R. Carey, which is the pen name he uses for his imaginative and character-driven sci-fi stories. But he has also written comic books for DC and Marvel, as well as dark fantasy and supernatural fiction novels. His first science fiction book, The Girl with All the Gifts, takes an empathetic approach to reimagining the zombie genre, which he later adapted into a feature film. The Rampart trilogy is set in a far future post-collapse England, where nature has turned hostile and technology is half myth. More recently, the Pandemonium series, with Infinity Gate and Echo of Worlds, explores a vast multiverse of parallel Earths, grappling with war, survival, dominant planetary species, and artificial intelligence. His newest novel, Outlaw Planet, which launches next week, is a standalone adventure novel set within his Pandemonium multiverse. Having read both Infinity Gate and Echo of Worlds, I'm excited to get my hands on this book once it's released. So with that said, welcome to our show, Michael. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks, guys. No, I'm great, and it's good to be on the show.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to have you here. So, are you excited about the upcoming book release?
I am, yeah, very, very, very much so. I'm really pleased with how Outlaw Planet came out. When I sort of pitched it to my editor as a sci-fi Western fusion, she was initially unconvinced, but I think it came together pretty well, all things considered.
So, having not read it yet, for our listeners who are not familiar with the Pandemonium multiverse, I understand this book also takes place in that universe as well. Can you just give us a bit of a background about that world, that multiverse?
Yeah, certainly. So in Infinity Gate, you have a Nigerian scientist, Hadiz Tambawal, who stumbles on the secret of interdimensional teleportation. And what she discovers is that she's not the first. Sooner or later, in every dimension, in every sort of alternate reality, somebody comes up with this technology, which is called step technology, and on a great number of those worlds, they eventually become part of an alliance, a huge trading and military alliance called the Pandemonium. Not everybody. Actually, the Pandemonium picks and chooses. Some worlds are so degraded by climate breakdown and resource depletion that they're not worth extending the invitation to. But you end up with this alliance of hundreds of thousands of alternate Earths, and they have the largest standing army in the multiverse, which is called the Cello. In those two books, in Infinity Gate and Echo of Worlds, eventually you have this huge conflict between the Pandemonium and an equally large grouping of worlds that has no organic life at all, but artificial intelligence. There's a kind of robotic hive mind. And that they're called the machine hegemony or the insurrection. That in Outlaw Planet, that's already played out. That conflict is backstory, and you just have the one world, this world which has never been adopted into the Pandemonium, and it's a weird outlier in that every single mammalian species on the North American continent has been raised to sentience. So there are literally hundreds of different groupings, different species that are all sort of bipedal, all fully intelligent, and they seem to be playing out an endless recapitulation of the American Civil War.
And that's a theme that existed in Infinity World and Infinity Gate and Echo of Worlds as well, where the dominant species of different planets, there would be various mammals or various species that would be raised to sentience, and then they would come together in the Pandemonium. And so it sounds like in Outlaw Planet, it's all in one world. That would be an interesting interaction.
And clearly that hasn't happened by chance. It's inexplicable. And there's a group of Cello soldiers who find themselves exiled on this planet, find themselves trapped on this planet, and are trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. why they keep fighting the same war, how you can possibly have a world with hundreds of different sentient species, how evolution could possibly have thrown that up. And, there are no spoilers, but the answer is evolution didn't. Somebody else did it.
Hey, interesting. Right on. So this is this continuing on with that multiverse is, but it's to be clear, it is not a continuation of the duology of the other two books. It's just in the same universe.
Yeah, there are no characters carried over from
Okay.
the other two books. It stands alone, but I guess it helps to have read the other two books and to sort of be aware of that wider context.
Right, right. So we won't learn what happens with Topaz Tourmaline Five Hills.
Sadly, not. Although she gets a mention
Okay.
right at the start.
Okay.
There are actually a couple of mentions to the rabbit and the robot on the registry, which is
Okay.
sort of like, yeah, referring back to those events.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So in that, there's a sense of this identity of different species coexisting. I got that sense from the previous books as well. That identity of species and AI, different types of AI. Humans brought to the point of AI, a different species of AI, not non-organic life. You play a lot with that sense of species identity. Is that intentional, or what do you think about that? What would you say
Um,
about that?
it was definitely, yeah, it was one of the themes I think that was at the core of the first two books. There was a, a lot of the impetus, the imaginative impetus for those books came from me thinking about the 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 kind of toxic narratives that are being spread at the moment in the UK about immigration, about immigrant communities and refugee communities. I think it's always fatally easy to look at a group that has a different ethnicity from you, a different cultural background from you, different sort of cultural touchstones to you, and to sort of like to deny them their essential humanity, to assume that different means less, othering, monstering the immigrant, and so at the heart of Infinity Gate, there is this completely avoidable conflict between organic minds and AI, robotic minds, inorganic minds. And each of them kind of starts from the assumption nothing can be truly intelligent that doesn't look like us. Nothing that is so alien to us can possibly really be a self, can possibly really be a mind, and therefore that they're expendable. In Outlaw Planet, it's a different kind of dynamic entirely. Really, it's a meditation on revenge, and on the sort of the revenge tragedy. That there was a 1970s western, The Outlaw Josie Wales, directed by Clint Eastwood. I think it was Clint Eastwood's directorial debut, actually, and it was an astonishing revenge narrative based on a novel by guys. I think the novel was written by Carter Forrest, and it's about what revenge does to you, what the pursuit of revenge does to you, how it distorts your personality and your perspectives, and the kind of toll it takes of you.
So that revenge narrative was a bit of a basis of maybe the storyline or your.
Yeah, it was. I've always loved the novel. Sorry, I've always loved the movie. I confess I've never read the novel. I skimmed it when I decided to kind of steal that story, file the serial numbers off, and do something new with it. But it's an astonishing movie because you kind of start out with the archetypal Clint Eastwood character, the ultimately self-reliant loner, completely cut off from any kind of familial background or any kind of support mechanism. A guy who lives by the law of his own guns. And for a lot of the story, it seems to be endorsing that myth, but then it becomes something completely different. What you have is that character gradually accreting a family around himself, very much against his will, kind of being dragged into relationships with other people, being dragged into a sense of responsibility for other people, and it builds to this astonishing climax where you think he is going out to sort of have a confrontation with an entire Comanche tribe, that he's going to his death. And he's not. He actually goes and has a conversation with the Comanche chief, Tembers, who was a real historical figure. And that conversation is the core of the movie, and it moves me to tears every time I see it. It's just astonishing. So I wanted to kind of I wanted to explore some of those themes, but see how they play out with a different how they play into the Pandemonian setting with a female lead rather than a female protagonist rather than a male protagonist, and how that changes the formula.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So the revenge narrative intersecting with good communication and kind of empathy or a view, understanding a different viewpoint perhaps, and how that might be able to change the narrative.
Yeah, yes, and it is about sort of being, I guess, being pulled against your will into seeing the other person's point of view. Eventually, sort of being made to understand that your perspective is incomplete, which I think is a lesson that is always painful to learn.
On that note of perspectives, too, I just wanted to ask sort of a technical question about the writing, because when I read Infinity Gate, and I think Kevin mentioned that we did do a review of it in a previous episode of the podcast, I noticed that you had a lot of different POVs. There were many different characters that held the spotlight for a number of different times. I'm curious if it started that way or if it sort of organically grew and you felt like, no, I need to tell the story of this character through their own eyes.
I think with Infinity Gate, I'd always wanted to sort of because it's built on the idea of worlds where you have rabbits and cats and dogs rather than apes that kind of climb the evolutionary ladder and become the dominant species. I was struggling with the question of how do you show that variety? How do you show that the scale, the scope of that? And it seemed the only way to do it really was to start from many, many different points of view, and to gradually build to the point of intersection, the point where all of those narratives cross. And again, I had a discussion about that with my editors, and they were worried. I mean, Paz doesn't come in until I think like 200 pages or so into the novel. It's a very, very delayed introduction for a character who ends up being, arguably the core of everything, the fulcrum of the way the story plays out. And initially, they asked, is it possible to sort of write this so that there is, so that all those characters are introduced at the beginning, and we just sort of swap between them. And I tried to write it like that, and it didn't work. So yeah, it was a question. It was a question of how do you sort of realistically portray a universe that has that much variety in it, that literally has endless variations on every possibility you can think of. And to some extent you can't. You have to cheat. You have to sort of use metaphorical tricks to give the audience that perspective. I think it helped that I'd been reading Adrian Tchaikovsky's Tyrant Philosophers books. How City of Last Chances, House of Open Wounds, Lives of Bitter Rain, because he's absolutely brilliant at that. It seems like every chapter introduces another character, and yet he never ever loses. It never becomes too diffuse. The story still coheres. So to some extent, I was inspired by that. I mean, that showed me that you can do this and you can make it work.
Yeah, and I think it did work. That having that narrative from the perspective of these different characters was an excellent way to get into their heads, especially given that they were, from another species. And you're writing for humans with a monkey background, so trying to get understand that perspective is tricky without first person. I can imagine.
Yeah, I really wanted with Paz. I wanted her to be sort of representative of the strengths of her species. So she's a rabbit. She's her instinct when she's threatened. Her instinct is to run, and she runs brilliantly. She does that sort of ducking and weaving, but also, she when she does turn at bay and fight, she's formidable in a different way. And it was nice to play the scenes where other characters underestimate her. And she turns out to have much more going on than they realize.
Yeah,
she was a fun character to write.
That I can imagine, and that underestimation thing came out pretty evidently. I really liked that component where it seems as though a character might have less power, but it those powers are not are sometimes harder to see. And even like a hedgehog character, right? A sentient
That
hedgehog that
yeah.
has its own ability to do great things, right?
Yeah,
Be
yeah.
conniving and smart.
I have to confess as well too when we read the book and there was the scene again without giving away too many spoilers where Paz faces off against the cello warrior, sort of the first real confrontation, and it. And I hope you take this the right way. It's meant in a good way, but I was reminded of the Judy Hopps character from Zootopia
Okay.
because she as well, to my mind, is underestimated, but formidable in her own way. And you know, I see it all the time when I walk my dog. You know, and if we run across rabbits on the trail, they will freeze, but if they decide to make a break for it, they can go faster than either
Yeah.
of us. So I was impressed by that. And again, it's meant as I mean that as a purely positive comparison. But I'm curious from a writing point of view. How did you get into the head of a rabbit?
Well, I guess it helps, you know, and I had seen Zootopia. I don't know whether Judy Hopps was in the back of my mind when I was writing Paz, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's in the mix there somewhere because she's a great character. One of my favorite books as a teenager was Watership Down. You know, Richard Adams' like great hero narrative with rabbits as the protagonists, and that does a fantastic job, I think, of convincing you that rabbits can be sort of larger than life warriors, leaders, thinkers. Um, there's an astonishing back to back thing in that book. There's two scenes that have you guys read it?
Long, long, long time ago. I'm
So
overdue for a reread.
there's a scene where so they're about to be invaded by General Woundwort by Ephrafa, this kind of like fascistic warren, ruled by a rabbit who's kind of like as big as a small dog, terrifying, grizzled warrior figure with a scar across his face. And Hazel, the leader of the sort of the good guys, he says, you know, we don't have to fight. Surely we don't have to fight. We can just talk this through. And he goes out to meet Woundwort, even though he's just recovered. He's been mauled by a cat. He can barely walk, but he limps out to sort of have this uh, uh, parley with Woundwort. And he says, you know, can't we just kind of like talk it through? And Woundwort says, no, we absolutely can't, and we're gonna roll right over you. And what's more, I can see why your chief sent you out to negotiate with us, because you're worthless. You're wounded. You're lame. You're crippled. I would kill you, but you're not even worth killing. Take this word back to your warren. We are going to destroy you. And then much later, Woundwort, not much later, in the next chapter or two chapters further on, Woundwort is fighting Bigwig inside the warren, and Bigwig is losing, but will not give up, will not move, and because it's a narrow warren, until Bigwig moves, they can't get through. And if he dies there, he's going to be a physical blockade. And Woundwort, in frustration, says, "Why won't you give up?" And Bigwig says, "Because my chief sent me here, and I'm not going to disobey him." And Woundwort is terrified because he always assumed that Bigwig was the chief. You know, because Bigwig is the biggest, he's the strongest. So who is this incredible chief rabbit that he hasn't seen yet? And he never realizes that it was the guy he despised. It was the guy he met on the road, who he thought was beneath his contempt. And I think it was just a wonderful sort of playing with your expectations.
Don't always assume those who are beneath your contempt should be. So yeah. The book release that you're doing next week, for those who are listening after the second or third week of November in 2025, the book will have been released already, Outlaw Planet. But talk a bit about this book release. I understand you're going to be there with Claire North in Bath, not in the Bath, but in the city of Bath in the UK.
Yep. We are going to be in dialogue with each other. There's no moderator. It's just me and Claire. Claire is going to be. She also has a new release, Slow Gods, which is absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best things she's ever written, I think, and is also kind of like a big space opera. She initially pitched it as her space pirate story. And she would always just say space pirates, pew pew pew. So I was expecting. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it is so powerful and it is so huge. She has kind of like in the culture novels, she has so many different civilizations coming together and so many different yeah, and entities from so many different backgrounds. It's incredibly powerful, incredibly moving. I'm really looking forward to discussing it with her and to sort of finding out where it came from, because it's not like anything else she's ever done.
We did a discussion with her fairly recently too, and she also similarly referred to it as pew pew, and we were also very excited to read that. We haven't read it yet, but looking forward to that.
There are space pirates in it, but there's so much more.
Yeah.
It repays. I'm going to reread it after the event as well.
hmm And is this what's this? Mr. B's Emporium of Reading Delights? Is that a bookstore?
I assume it must be. I don't know. I'm looking for a bookstore, so
It's
if it turns out to be a supermarket an aquarium, I'm going to be in trouble. But
it's a great name for a bookstore.
it is, yeah. Can't fault it.
Yeah. And Tristan actually is going to be in Bath the day after, so he's going to miss
Oh,
you
really?
guys and you're just by one day. It's too bad.
So are you based in UK, Tristan, or?
No, just I happen to be on my way over to visit family, and I have family that live in Bath,
Okay,
so I'll
it's a
be there the next day. Yeah,
beautiful city.
yeah. I if you don't mind, I kind of want to go back a little bit, and I find this interesting because we just went out for a pint last night with Kevin and James and Sam, and I had mentioned to you guys that I'm not stepping away from all science fiction, but I'm taking turns and reading more westerns. I just finished True Grit for the first time, Charles Portis, which was
Right.
lovely.
I'm a fan of the Western, but I have to admit it's Western movies. It's not Western novels. So Larry McMurtry has been recommended to me many times, and I have a copy of Lonesome Dove sitting here, but I haven't cracked it open yet. Um, but I love Western movies, and I have many favorites there. I mean, obviously the dollar westerns, especially Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Once Upon a Time in America. Once Upon a Time in the West, sorry, but also Clint Eastwood. I think Unforgiven. Unforgiven
Yeah.
is a masterpiece. In a completely different vein, there is a really silly western called Silverado, which
Yep.
starred it
Kevin
had
Costner.
Kevin
Yeah.
Costner, Kevin Kline. It had John Cleese as a sheriff,
Right. Oh,
very,
that's
very,
right. That's
very,
right.
very implausibly. But I love that movie. It's completely non-serious, but it plays with Western tropes in a really joyous way, I think. And it ends with four, not one, but four different gunfights, and it's exactly the people who you want to be fighting in each case. Each of the heroes has a nemesis, and you're just waiting for those confrontations to come. What are some of the others that I love? There's a movie called Lone Star, which is not technically a western. It's about a Texas Ranger and his relationship with his father, who was also a lawman. But that again sort of like deliberately calls on western tropes, and I think it's really good. And there's a movie set in Australia called The Proposition, directed by Warren
Right.
Ellis, from a screenplay by Nick Cave, which I thought was
Right.
astonishing, powerful, dark, brutal, but really beautifully done.
Nice. So, what is it about the Western? I find um, I just am easily drawn to them, and even in the film sense. And I find there's a common theme, and that's something that you touched on, which is revenge. The other thing, which almost seems close to revenge, which is justice. Did you bring that theme in? Did you have to battle with those two things, that difference between justice and revenge, because they're so dominant in Western themes for some reason. And can you tell us why you think they're so popular?
Yeah, well, I think like I mean, in terms of the Western narrative, that I read an article a while back that pointed out that the West was actually a moment. It wasn't a place, it was a moment. For each individual, for each part of Western America, Western USA, it was only a frontier for like a decade or a couple of decades, and then the frontier would move on. But the Western is always, I think, is always set on that frontier, which means it's kind of like the furthest reach of civilization, like the most attenuated bit of civilization, where people have come, communities have come, and the law is sort of is coming, but it's a place where the remit of the law, the remit of civilization is kind of at its limit. So yeah, you can have justice, but probably you can only have justice if you have strength, if you have the ability, or you can call on someone who has the ability to enact justice. It's just justice sort of in the hands of individuals. So I think it's that it's exploring the relationship between individuals and society, and between chaos and order, chaos and law. And the vengeance motif. It's somebody, well, the Clint Eastwood character in Outlaw Josie Wales is someone who's lost his family to northern irregulars, northern mercenaries in the first year of the Civil War. And so what does he do? He basically becomes a mercenary for the South, and delivers to other people the same torment, the same horrors that have been visited on his family. And then at the end of the war, he realizes that hasn't brought him any satisfaction at all. That, he wasn't an incarnation of justice. He was just a killer. And the narrative of the movie is about him sort of trying to sort of come to terms with that, and then trying to move beyond that.
So with Outlaw Planet, would you say this is, I mean, it's a planet, it's a place, but is it also a time? Is this discovering what law and getting rid of lawlessness?
So it's a place that is trapped in a time. It's a place that is endlessly repeating a particular. It's kind of like that, taking that narrow window and then preventing anybody from moving beyond it. So they've been fighting the Civil War for literally thousands of years, and at the end of each cycle, it just starts again. Everybody everybody who's still alive takes up their places, and the whole thing starts again. And you have. So the protagonist, my outlaw is a woman named Dog Bitch Bess, and she is somebody who's absolutely within that cycle, can't see beyond it. But there is another character who is able to understand what's happening, and it's ultimately about the two of them coming together to try to end it, to end the cycle of vengeance, the cycle of sort of violence and retribution, and install something else.
That lawlessness and that comes out of Western literature, but it also relates to what we've heard other authors tell us about the use of post-apocalyptic worlds, where the characters are taken out of their comfort zones, or out of it's essentially lawless and resource scarcity and the whole bit. I hadn't considered that lawlessness of the West, of that time period of the frontier, is kind of analogous to the post-apocalyptic theme, because it puts the characters in those difficult situations.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I guess I hadn't made that connection either. But I, so many of the things that we do, so many of the sort of the ways in which we behave throughout our lives, it's kind of scripts that are given to us, isn't it? That there are frameworks, there are rules, and we know what the rules are, and we internalize them when we act in accordance to them. And in a post-apocalyptic narrative, all of those frameworks have fallen away, and you're just left with, who are you? Who are you without the frameworks? Who are you when the rules no longer apply?
You don't have any social supports. So.
Yeah. So it's kind of asking the question, what is the basic kit, and what is just like imposed on us by the social the code, the framework,
normative behaviors and all that,
Yeah.
which brings us a bit to your Rampart trilogy. If we go back a bit, if it's okay to shift gears a little bit, post-collapse England. For those who haven't read that, I think it's worth just doing a brief touch on that. Can you introduce that to our readers who haven't read those books?
Yeah, certainly. So those books, came out of a reverie about climate breakdown and about I was reading a lot of stuff in Scientific American and the British equivalent, which I can't remember what it's called now, New Scientist, about possible technological interventions that might save the world, that might sort of reverse climate collapse. And there's things like using algae blooms in the ocean for carbon capture, and firing silicates into the upper atmosphere to reflect sunlight away. And the problem with all of those things is if you mess them up, you end up with a situation that's considerably worse than the problem you were trying to solve. And they're all of them kind of irreversible. So you get to try it once, and then you have to live with the consequences. So I was imagining a world that was sort of like doubly burdened. It was burdened with climate breakdown. It was also burdened with the side effects of some of these attempted interventions. So in Coley's world, Coley being the main character of the Rampart books, in Coley's world, they try to deal with deforestation by creating really aggressive new species of trees that could take their nutrients from anything and grew super fast. And if they were in a place that was deficient in nutrients, they could move. They could actually sort of go and find a better deal elsewhere. So Coley lives in England, which is largely depopulated as far as humanity is concerned. There are a few human communities left, and they're separated from each other by gigantic feral forests, like predatory forests, filled with mutant trees that will eat you if you stumble, and will, if you don't stumble, they'll trip you up and then they'll eat you. This was kind of a way of I guess returning civilization to a kind of almost like a feudal level of technology. They haven't got access to mass production anymore because there's only a few thousand people in the UK. So even if they've retained the knowledge, they wouldn't be able to make complicated tools or equipment. And there are only a handful of artifacts that have survived from our time. And the people who can use those things, those weapons, those tools, are the ramparts. They're the leaders, the protectors of their community. And Coley Woodsmith is not a rampart. He wants to be. He dreams of being a rampart, but he is not chosen. And then he figures out that actually he's not chosen because the fix is in, and the entire situation is rigged. And so he kind of rebels against that and is cast out into the forest. And then his odyssey sort of takes him back to through a sort of investigation of how the world got this way. And then eventually, like Melanie and the Girl with All the Gifts, eventually he's faced with a choice which might mean bringing humanity back to greatness, back to a position of ruling the ecosystem. But what's that going to mean? Yeah, are they just going to repeat the same mistakes over again?
Well, you also mentioned The Girl with All the Gifts there. And for those who don't know, Mike took that novel and rewrote it as a screenplay, and it was made into a feature film. I'd love to hear about that process. How was it taking your own novel and making it into a screenplay?
It was actually wonderful. It was the dream version of that transaction rather than the nightmare version, because you do hear about authors who sell the rights to their work and then are sort of appalled at what it becomes. I was really sort of floating on air through that whole time. It was kind of weird in terms of process. What happened was I wrote a short story called Iphigenia and Owless, which is just the first chunk of Girl with All the Gifts, up to the point where the base falls, and Melanie and the other characters have to sort of go on the run. And having written that story, I didn't want to put the character down. I was sort of in Melanie's head, and I thought, there's more here. There's more to this character, this smart, kind little girl who is also a monster, who is also a sort of flesh-eating monster. So I started pitching the novel to my then editor, Anne Clark, who was was not a huge fan. I think it's fair to say, because I was already contracted to write a completely different book. Um, and she didn't want me to be distracted. But at the same time, I met Cami Gatan, who was the lead producer on the movie, and I pitched the idea to her, and she said, "Yeah, this is great." And actually, she said, I know a director who really wants to do a kind of post-apocalyptic story set in ruined urban locations, and that was Colin McCarthy. So I started writing the novel at the same time as I started writing the screenplay. They were both based on the short story, and it was weird. It meant that the whole of that like year and a half, I was just living in that fictional space, but I was like exploring different pathways through it, and somehow each of them helped the other. The writing the movie helped me get the novel straight in my head, and vice versa. It was just wonderful. And then when we went to film, which was the principal shooting was 18 months after the novel came out, because movies grow more slowly than books do. Um, I was invited on set, so yeah, I got to be a zombie. I got to get shot. I was shot in the head. I was one of the zombies who dies at the fence in the scene where the base falls, which is very
Really?
cool.
That would
Yeah,
be a great experience.
and my wife is the zombie next to me, and as I go down with my head a bleeding ruin, she's laughing. It's
As she should.
no, but it's wonderful. And I got to meet Glenn Close, and Gemma Arterton, which was like awesome, absolutely awesome. And we were really lucky. So the young actor who played Melanie, Senya Nanawa, that was her first feature. It was her feature debut. She'd been in short fictions, short movie shorts before, but she'd never been in a feature. And she's on screen for like everything but 2 minutes, I think. It's like the entire movie hinges on her performance, and she's just brilliant. She's just a perfect Melanie. And she was it all that almost didn't happen. She was one of the last two actors who were auditioned. So Colin and Cami had been auditioning. I think they'd done live auditions for about 60 actors, and they'd looked at 500 audition tapes, and then they had a short list of six. And on the day that the Friday before they were going to do the chemistry readings for Gemma Arterton, an old friend of Colin's called him up and said, "I've got two more girls. I want you to look at two more girls. They're both really, really good, and you'll be sorry if you miss them." And Colin said, I don't want to drive up to Northampton. I want to have a weekend. And the guy said, "You got to come." And one of those two girls was Senya.
I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't talk comics as well too. And I, as one of the comics guys on the podcast, I'm interested at least to scratch that surface, and maybe we can revisit another day. But
I would love to talk comics.
great, me too, all the time. Um, uh, although sadly, I have not the bandwidth or the money to be as in depth with it as I used to be. But I will say I was fortunate. I was very fortunate in 2007 to work on a documentary series about comics for the Independent Film Channel. Uh, and we were so lucky to get so many talented artists and writers to contribute. And this was like just prior to the Marvel Cinematic Universe even coming onto the stage. So this was so early. I'll just give you a little story that when we were returning from a trip to the United States, being based here in Toronto, our bags were being searched. All of our gear, our camera gear and whatnot was being searched by customs. And they asked us what we were doing. And we said a documentary about comic books. And I remember the young woman, the customs agent, looked at me straight in the eye and she said, "Do they still make those?" and, and I said, yes, they do. But it was an interesting reminder at that point, in that how there, other than hardcore fans, people weren't aware. That all quickly changed,
Yeah.
and this is sort of an overall question. I want to get a little more specific to you as well too. But what's your take on how comics and the industry and the fandom has evolved since those days, pre MCU, pre Snyder, pre Gunn, and movies really being the primary generally communication source for comics IP.
Mm. I think, yeah. So I think it's been a kind of rejuvenation, literally in the sense of like injection of youth into it, because there was this problem in the 90s. There were the wars between with publishers and distributors, kind of like choosing sides, and everything narrowed down until there was only one comic distributor, Diamond. And most of the trade was to the direct market, to comic specialist comic shops. But when I was a kid, every news agent you walked into had a spinner rack with comics, and they weren't just DC and Marvel comics. They were, you know, Dell, Ace, Gold Key, Harvey. There were all of these other publishers. And I think it was narrowing down, and it was hollowing out through the 90s and like into the noughties, with, yeah, a hardcore audience who had read comics as kids and was still sort of still passionate about them, but no easy entry point for new readers. And I think what the success of the superhero movies has done is it's convinced a new generation of readers that there's something in there that's worth exploring. Um, and so you've seen a kind of proliferation again of independent publishers around the big two. And I think that DC and Marvel don't have the command of the market that they had 20 years ago. You know, you've got Oni, you've got Image, you've got Dark Horse, you've got a whole host of Bad Idea. Um, you've got all of those guys now sort of making a real presence in the marketplace, and doing the kind of risky stuff with comics that Vertigo was doing back in the day. I think it's an exciting time.
To see that rejuvenation is encouraging. And I remember those days too, of where it was sort of, it had become a little calcified, and it was running a lot on speculation as well too. It wasn't
Oh,
about the
yeah, yeah.
joy of the material. It was how much is this going to be worth in, 10 years or whatever. But speaking of Vertigo, and Karen Berger was one of the people I was lucky enough to interview for that series. And in doing my research for this episode, I ran across a little quote from a previous interview that you had done, where you mentioned having run into Karen, and when you were just starting out. And according to the quote, you say, "We were chatting and I said, I'm still looking for the big break. And she said, there's no such thing as the big break. You want to stop thinking in those terms. There's a long, long series of little breaks."
Yeah.
How's your perspective on that now? Is it still the same when you look back on that? And is that how it really played out for you?
I think it is. Yeah, I think she was absolutely right. I think what she meant was, it's not any one moment that's going to define you. You're not going to be discovered. You just keep pushing it. You keep slogging away, and you keep building and building. You build your skill set, you build your contacts, and yeah, if you're lucky at the end of it, you're somewhere where you wanted to be. And that's certainly how it happened for me. Although having said that, getting to write for Vertigo was a turning point. It took me a long, long time to get there. I did a lot of work for British indies and for American indies, and I was sending everything that I had published to actually to Karen, and then to Elisa Whitney, who was the editor on Sandman at the end of its run, with begging letters. Please, please, please let me work for you. And then eventually I got a response, and that, writing Lucifer was, it was huge. It was huge. And it made a whole lot of other things possible. But I think the thing is, all that time when I was like, there was a point where every publisher I got published by immediately went bankrupt. It happened like 3 times: bankrupted or bought out by somebody else. What Jonah does to shipping in the Bible, I did to small presses. And you kind of think, it's a waste. All of that time, all of that effort, it's all wasted. But it isn't. It's not wasted, because you're learning how to do it, and you're learning how the industry works. And it means that when you do get an opportunity, it's like, the ball has sort of fallen into your hands, and you can run with it. You have the
They were your
confidence to run with
practice
it.
runs.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, you were honing your craft and learning how to do it well, as
yeah,
opposed to just doing it. So that's cool. And again, in the little bit of research that I was doing, I read about that. you were a former English teacher, is that correct? And
Yeah.
your wife was encouraging you to pick up comics as a potential avenue of writing because that's what you were reading. Can you tell us what it was that you were reading? What were your favorite things at that point that
So,
inspired you?
well, this would have been sort of like mid '80s, and so it was an incredible time. It was a time when Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, and Sandman were all coming out like within a few years of each other, and it was a time when there was kind of like a new template, I think, for long form storytelling. Whenever I talk about this, I mention Thomas Kuhn, the physicist, who said, people get the wrong impression about science. There is this idea that science is like it's just like built up methodically, brick on brick on brick, standing on the shoulders of giants. But actually, what happens is you have a genius comes along and says the universe works like this, and everybody sort of buys into that explanation, that formula, for a century or a couple of centuries, until somebody else comes along and says, no, forget all of that stuff, it's actually like this, and then that becomes the template. So everybody is into Isaac Newton until Einstein comes and says, hold my beer. I don't know. I don't know enough about science to know if it works like that in science, but it definitely works like that in storytelling. So somebody comes along and says, you can tell stories like this, and dozens or hundreds of other writers go, oh my God, I want to do that. I want to do what he's doing or what she's doing. I think Chris Claremont did this when he revived the X-Men. He created a kind of soap opera-y, endless narrative, which was different from what had been there before, and everybody started copying that. And I think what you get in the '80s is you get Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, people like that coming in and doing in the mainstream superhero market stuff that had never been done before, almost kind of like a novelistic form of storytelling. And I came on board with my head full of that. And you can definitely tell if you read my early issues of Lucifer that I'm writing under the influence of those guys, and it takes me a while to sort of come up with my own voice. I think I can actually pinpoint the moment when it happened. Issue 4 of Lucifer, which is called Born with the Dead, which introduces the character of Elaine Belloc. I think that's the first issue where I had the confidence to just be me and not kind of pastiche those other huge amazing guys.
I think that is such a wonderful and self-aware thing to be able to say and to be able to look back because as well the people you just cited are no slouches, so to be
Right.
pastiching from them, and I remember having those revelatory moments reading their work as well too, for my money. More, it's not a Vertigo title, but Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman is one of the premier comics properties I've ever read. I think that's really wonderful. And we could, I think, go on and on talking about that and Lucifer, but I do want to talk about Lucifer just on a little note as well too, because that I find it really fascinating. I was always a big superhero guy, and I feel no shame in admitting that. I read a
Me
little
too.
bit of
Me
the
too.
other press, the indie stuff and the a little bit of Vertigo. I did a bit of that, but I'm a superhero guy at heart. But when we all know going in with those stories that they're heroes, or even if they're reluctant heroes or they're anti-heroes. But Lucifer is the villain. How did you approach that? And forgive me if I'm sure you've been over this territory before, but it still boggles my mind. How do you take a character like that and make him your protagonist in an ongoing series?
So I think, I mean, to some extent, obviously, I'm writing in the context of Sandman. Yeah, he's a character who was created by Gaiman in Sandman, and there is already a kind of context for that in that book. Morpheus is very, very seldom at the heart of the action. The stories are stories about other people, and then Morpheus Dream, the Sandman, comes in as a kind of almost like an accident to the terrain, or like a Deus ex machina I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. He's somebody who comes in from a different level of reality to influence the lives of the human characters. And you see that play out again and again, I think, in Sandman. And I was doing that in Lucifer. Lucifer is not at the heart of the action. He is the catalyst for the action. But also, I'd read, you mentioned that I was a teacher for many years. I was teaching English literature. One of my favorite English poets is William Blake, a visionary poet who belonged to a sort of weird fringe religious sect. He was a dissenter. And he wrote a book called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, in which he has Satan as a character, and he has God as a character, but it's not good versus evil. It's will or desire versus control. It's like that God is the power that says thou shalt not, and Satan is the power who says yes, I will, I'm going to, no matter what you tell me. And I think that's how I wrote Lucifer. He's not evil in a classical sense. He doesn't set out to harm, but he is absolutely fixated on his own agenda, and he won't let anything get in his way. And ultimately that makes him evil, because, you know, what is evil except ignoring other people's perspective, other people's humanity, and just pursuing your own goals. So that was my starting point.
It's a very timely observation given the political situation in the world we live in today.
Sadly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Most authors that we speak to, they know what they're working on and maybe a book or two ahead. Unless you're Adrian, you probably know 7 books ahead what you're going to write.
Yeah.
But what can we expect? Are there any comics, any more screenplays or books that we can look forward to?
Books, definitely. Comics, I hope. Yeah. So I've got a book coming out next spring, which is a retelling of a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Tinderbox, which is about a soldier and a witch in a magic box that has three demons locked inside it. That's coming out sort of, I think, March or April of next year. And then toward the end of next year, there will be a book which is very odd and doesn't have a title yet, but it's about a tidally locked planet, a planet that has a day side and a night side. It's constantly locked to the same position respective to its sun. Yeah, I'm still searching for a title for that one. In terms of comics, Cul-de-sac, my Teenage Vampires on the Run story is winding up soon, but I may do some more in that continuity, and I would like to do some more Ghost Box with Pablo Raimondi. There's a collection coming out from Comixology, from Mad Cave soon.
I got to ask, knowing we've talked about Vertigo and sadly had gone away for a little while, but I've heard rumors of a resurrection. What can you tell us about that? And is there anything on your radar for new Vertigo work from yourself?
I've heard those rumors too, and I would love to pitch for it, but I think their remit is more about new voices than it is about sort of going back to the olden days of Vertigo. But yeah, I did a book when Joe Hill was editing the Hill House comics. I did a book called The Dollhouse Family, and that felt very much like a Vertigo outing. You know, not least because I was teaming up with Peter Gross again, my collaborator on Lucifer and The Unwritten. If they drop a hint in my direction that they will be up for a pitch, I would be there in like a shot. I mean, I loved Vertigo. I still love Vertigo. I don't think there's ever been anything like it.
Thank you, Mike, for being on the bridge. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. We hope you appreciated the episode. We sure did. We'll definitely have Mike on the show again in the future because he's fantastic. What a nice guy. Lots more to come from Tales from the Bridge every couple of weeks. We appreciate you very much. Until next time.